I was doing door-to-door sales. That's all I knew how to do. Like, if I didn't want to go work for somebody I didn't respect and make 30 grand a year being told what to do all the time, it was like, well, door-to-door seems like a pretty good alternative because I can work on my own schedule. I can make six figures, and then I can work when I want to and not work when I don't want to. Nobody's going to listen to anything that I say, and probably for good reason. The only way that was going to be possible is if I started a podcast about door-to-door sales. But I was trying to distance myself from doing that, and I knew that if I did a show about it, it would only draw me in further into the industry, and I was trying to get away from it. So.
All right, everybody, have you ever thought about getting into podcasting? I know I have. It's been okay so far, but we have a very special guest with us today who really is helping everybody to sort of wrap their minds around, get into, crack the code of, and also the whole how am I going to get a guest or become a guest, all of that and so much more being solved on today's edition of our podcast. But first, let's welcome in co-host David Meltzer, the amazing entrepreneur helping so many people all around the world, and also the beautiful Lacey Book, and very importantly, our guest, Travis Chappell. Thanks for being with us.
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me. What's up, Dave?
What's up, buddy?
Great to connect in person.
Yes.
IRL, as they say. Yeah.
We love that in real life. You know, you got to give the
Finally,
lingo.
in real
Yeah.
It's always puzzling who you know IRL and who's not.
Yes,
Yeah.
And
right.
when you do as many interviews that we do,
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
it's extremely, I mean, believe it or not, before I even got here to the studio, and I was not joking to the lady, I go, I've done 9 interviews this morning.
Oh, wow,
Between
yeah.
Instagram Live and
Yep.
office hours, I have done 9 interviews before I got here.
Right.
And those were all virtual. And then people come up to you and either they're like, how do I know you?
Yes. Oh, dude.
Or you're like,
Familiarity.
have we met?
I feel so
IRL?
bad every
Yeah.
time because you do such a volume of Zoom conversations,
Right.
and you just can't place the name or the face as much, you know. Well, we literally did that 5
Just
minutes
right
ago
now.
when I
Right.
sat down. It's like
That's why I
I
was
feel like
laughing
we
at you
met
guys.
before.
Well, the good
The
news
producer's
is-
like, yeah, you guys did an interview like 3 years ago
The good
virtually.
news
I
is
was like,
we were on the
that's what
same
it is.
page. We're like,
That's
oh,
right.
you look familiar, you look familiar.
That's right.
Versus, you know me, right?
Yeah,
'Cause
right.
that's always the awkward
It is
one,
very
right?
awkward.
Yeah, well, I saw Shawn originally, and I couldn't figure out. And then it was like, oh yeah, OnlyFans. you're my favorite.
Right,
I love your
right.
feet, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't take those shoes off.
It is working.
I love them.
Let me see if your feet look familiar. Yeah.
But I want to talk about Guestio because
Yeah.
I got a vested interest in Guestio.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I want to start with this. I want to start with a.
Then we'll talk about that.
Well, no, it leads into this because
Okay.
I want to start with this thesis of mine. I love asking. I mean, we do our podcast, so obviously big believer in it. But one of the things that I talk to a lot of people about, and when we talk about podcasting, there's a lot of reservation. Oh, I don't know, like, you know, Joe Rogan or Call Her Daddy. I don't know. I don't have the right equipment. How am I going to get to that level? And I always tell people, you know, what's interesting though. Why not have a local podcast? Right. You could win easily if I had the podcast of Omaha, right? I don't have to necessarily be thinking that I need to broadcast my podcast all across the entire nation. And then what that kind of leads into is because if I had the podcast of Omaha, getting guests, I always tell people that would be super easy because then I would call people in Omaha.
Who's
and I would
gonna say no?
Yeah, who would say
Right.
no? If you were the mayor of Omaha and I was like, do you want to be on the Omaha podcast? Kind of a bad look if you're like, nah. I'm not
Yeah,
doing that, right?
I don't think so.
So I think
Not for me.
it's easier to break into, and I'd love to sort of begin with your thoughts. Like, shouldn't everybody start having a podcast? The great
Yeah.
equalizer?
I totally agree with you. The thing that people get wrong is that they conflate Joe Rogan with success, which he's obviously extremely successful. But the point is that you don't have to be Joe Rogan to have a successful podcast or to make it make sense as a use of your time. So, you know, my thing is just like if you have anything to gain from meeting interesting people, then having a podcast is probably something that you should think about or consider. The listeners are obviously great, but like the core reason to do it is just the excuse to have conversations that build rapport
Relationships
with people who you might not have ever met, or maybe you did meet, or like we've met maybe at a conference or something like that. But then you actually get to sit down, have an excuse to ask questions, things that you're interested in, build a relationship, have genuine conversation, and then potentially do stuff afterwards, and then be able to have those relationships moving forward. So my metric is way less about like, oh, how many listeners can you get, and it's way more about like finding things and activities that are limited downside with extremely high upside potential. And podcasting to me is like the ultimate version of that, right? Like any other form of business, there's typically a lot of risk involved in doing, like even if it's a franchise or something like that. We're actually franchising an Everbowl right now, and my wife's getting
They're
ready.
owners.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah. So my wife's getting ready to open our Everbowl store in a couple of weeks. And like franchising is a great opportunity to limit your downside, to limit your risk. But there's still inherently a ton of risk. You still hundreds of thousands of dollars out of pocket to open up a single store. You still, might get an SBA loan. You might there's a bunch of other things that you have to consider. And the upside is high, but it's not unlimited, in scope. You're not going to be doing 10 million a year out of your Everbowl store. But a podcast is, yeah, right, exactly. Unless you have 17 of them or 20 of them, but
or Drew Brees.
Or Drew Brees. Yeah, I think he's going to be doing fairly well for himself.
Sure.
Yeah.
See me, I just think to override on everyone.
But also it's also 10 times more risk to get that much more earning potential. Whereas a podcast to me is one of those things where it's like it's such limited downside. Like there's almost no downside, especially if you have any excess money in your bank account. There's almost no downside at all.
Right.
In fact, like this mic, I don't know what exactly this is, but it's probably less than $200. It's connected to an XLR, but you don't have to connect XLR. You can connect the USB directly into your computer. There's a mic on Amazon for like $100. Audio Technica ATR2 2100, I believe it's called, and it's USB-C. You can plug directly into your computer. For $100, you can start a podcast. It's like there's no downside to doing it, but the upside potential is like, oh, it could actually turn into something that attracts listenership. I can get sponsors. It can pay me a theoretically unlimited number. Joe Rogan, these people there's several now. Joe Rogan was the first one, but there's several $100 million podcast deals that have happened. The Kelsey brothers just signed one. Caller Daddy was 60 or 70 million. Smartlist was 60 plus million. Somebody else just signed a $100 million deal. I'm blanking on who it was, but Wondery is buying shows. Gimlet was buying shows before they were acquired by Spotify. So there's unlimited upside potential, plus the networking that you get, plus you get to work on your communication skills, plus you get to work on asking better questions. The knowledge that you gain, like selfishly, from being able to have people on and then just get free coaching from them for like an hour. You know what I mean? Like those things are just that's why I say the downside is so low and the upside is so great that it just doesn't make sense to me to not at least consider starting a show.
Well, what I love what you said, Travis, is you were talking about all of the things that a podcast can provide you. And I think so many people go into podcasting with an idea of what it means to be successful, like you said, and the mark is Joe Rogan. But if you can early on define what success means to you, like why are you actually doing it, I think that more people would be willing to jump in. Like, am I just trying to get brand awareness? Am I trying to build relationships in my community? Am I trying to find collaborative partners? Am I just trying to gain more knowledge? Or even just purely credibility, right? It's a standard credibility builder. And so I think helping people identify different areas that they can deem as success when having a podcast might take some of the apprehension away.
Yeah, totally. And it was, for me, when I started mine, I had no idea how money was going to come in on the show at all. I had not started a business before, ever. I was 24. I was doing door-to-door sales, and I had a unaccredited degree in Bible and church ministries. There was like nothing. Nobody was hiring for that position. Right? You know what I mean? Like nobody's like lining up out the door to be like, all right, next unaccredited, bachelor's degree, come on in. So I was doing door-to-door sales. That's all I knew how to do. Like if I didn't want to go work for somebody I didn't respect and make 30 grand a year being told what to do all the time, it was like, well, door-to-door seems like a pretty good alternative because I can work on my own schedule. I can make six figures, and then I can work when I want to and not work when I don't want to. But then I just kind of started getting sick of it, and I was like, yeah, let's start this podcast thing. No idea what it would turn into, no idea what business would come off the back end, no idea how I'd make money off of it. It was just purely a play to build relationships, gain knowledge, and the goal eventually was to get the show to make money by itself, but it turned into 3 or 4 different businesses along the way, because you just build the audience, you get to know them, you ask them what they want from you, and then you create a product or service that solves the need that they tell you that they have. It's like the opposite of door-to-door sales in every aspect. It's you go from like the coldest form of selling to the warmest form of selling. It's not even selling really. I tell people it's more like order taking. You jump on a call, they've already been listening to you for 9 months. They're just excited to talk to the person that they've been getting free advice from for forever. And then you happen to build a product or service that solves the exact problem that they're experiencing every day. Who else are they going to trust to solve that problem? And then you get to work with the people that are listening to your show all the time anyway. Like it's a cool business model.
Yep.
And with Guestio,
Yeah.
guests are important. And, I was blessed to start with one of the best podcasters that I know, Gary, who convinced me to get off the radio with Jim Leyritz, my Sports Blender syndicated sports show, and said, hey, a whole bunch of really cool guests. You should do a podcast.
Yeah.
And way back then I said, there's too many podcasts. There's 200,000 podcasts.
Yeah.
And he's like, for the sake of what do you do in the podcast? And that's where I built my entire content strategy through, because my content started with just the podcast and then a vlog. So I'd vlog myself because you'd have to travel to do the podcast. You couldn't do them virtually back then.
Yeah.
And so what I found is, one, the experience of it. And included in the experience was what I called the MBA in a day. Like when you sit down with John Hennessy, the chairman of Alphabet, and he's excited to be on your podcast.
Right.
And meanwhile, you're like, how much would it cost me to get a session with John Hennessy about raising money?
Yeah.
Right, the chairman of Alphabet. So if you don't know who that is because you're young.
It's probably impossible. The answer is it's
And
impossible.
people were paying, Warren Buffett, for example, who's been on the podcast, $250,000 to have lunch with him. And I think it got up to over $2 million later to have lunch with him. But yet he'll come on your podcast.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's this experiential thing, even virtually, that occurs. And knowledge is one of those. Napoleon Hill, which is extremely important to me, Think and Grow Rich. What he was the first podcaster, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Carnegie funded him, go interview.
To interview people, yeah.
He just didn't understand capture. So he couldn't capture the experience other than writing a book. Imagine if they had the technology today with the 100 world leaders that he wrote that book that'll be good for another 100,000 years.
Right.
2, business development. That's obvious. And the business development occurs as being a guest and having guests. So if you're a podcaster and you're not a guest, you're missing out.
Yeah. And the other way as well.
Of course.
So that's we brought up Everbowl and Jeff earlier. That was the conversation that I had with Jeff like a couple of years ago, was that he was going on a bunch of shows. Fleischman introduced us because he was like, hey, help Jeff get booked on more podcasts. And I sat down with Jeff and I was like, how many, like what podcasts you been on? He was like, oh, like 380 of them. And I was like, well, I got news for you, bro. Like, like you should probably at this point have your own show because like you've done a lot of guesting and that's great, but people still want a hub.
But you have to, by the way, put the Fenster factor in. So if Jeff Fenster says he was a guest on 380 shows, it's kind of like men and women saying how many people they've slept with, right? You always divide the men by 7 and times the women by 3. And so at least divide them. You end up with the same number, by the way. Go ahead.
Yeah. So that was the conversation I had with him. It was just like, hey, you've been a guest on a ton of
Ironically,
shows.
right? I've been advising
Now you
him,
should.
Travis. I've been advising Fenster and Fleischman
Yeah.
since they were boys, and now all of these guys are together. But the last one, post-production content, I still think people don't get. I think my real leap has occurred that I understand how to capture content, and people think that capturing content is content creation. I pay people to create my content, but I'm a master of capturing content, which is my Napoleon Hill story. Imagine if he's actually a master at capturing what he learned. And now today, because of these technologies, the phones, et cetera, people aren't capturing enough of their own essence, which only leads to more guesting and being and having and hosting guests, which creates more experience, more business development, and more content.
Yeah, and that was the whole reason that we started Guestio, was like, that was my thesis from the beginning of my show, is because at the time, again, I was a 24-year-old kid, and I was just like, nobody's going to listen to anything that I say, and probably for good reason. Like, I don't really know what I'm talking about.
24-year-old life coach, Travis Chappell.
Exactly.
All my runway of life experience.
Right. So it was the only way that was going to be possible is if I started a podcast about door-to-door sales. But I was trying to distance myself from doing that. and I knew that if I like did a show about it, it would only draw me in further into the industry, and I was trying to get away from that. So I was like, okay, well, what's something else I can talk about that seems to be important? And networking, building relationships was one of those things. And so I started the show with that in mind. But my entire strategy was interviewing 3 people a week. For the first, I think, 2 full years of my show was 3 people a week of just interviews. I wasn't doing any solo content. I wasn't putting out any of my own stuff, because my thought was like, I had this quote on my whiteboard when I first started. It was from Steve Martin, "Be so good they can't ignore you." And it was just like, if I can get the best guests possible, then people can't at least ignore my effort. Like, they can't ignore the fact that I'm doing this if I can go out and get the best voices possible and figure out a way to extract information in a way from them that's more digestible for my audience. And so had to learn a lot about how to find book and find and book guests, but then also how to interview guests, how to have a good conversation with somebody where when they leave the conversation, they feel energized instead of feeling down and feeling depressed almost, because it was such a difficult conversation I've gotten out of 15-minute conversations that seem like 2 hours, and I've gotten out of 2-hour conversations that seem like 15 minutes. And that skill by itself was something that I had to learn, and that's been useful in literally every other area of my business and in my life as well. But
how have you enjoyed
the
the last
guesting
2
is a big thing.
hours?
What's that? Yeah, the last 2 hours. Yeah.
Well, tell us more about Guestio. How does it work? Who's it for? How can people really get the most and maximize all that Guestio has to offer?
Yeah, so we started it to be for podcasters looking to book guests. We've kind of shifted that model a little bit, and we're focusing a little bit more on helping guests get booked on podcasts, mainly just because we found that the market for podcasters who are willing to pay to interview guests is a really small market. And so we're just trying to pivot the company to move toward a market that's a little bit more, just a little bit more sizable. So the number of people who want to be a guest on shows is only growing, significantly growing. In fact, it's, to me, leaving a shortage in the space for podcasters, because what's crazy to me is, since 2020, I believe the total number of index podcasts has gone from 2 million to 4.4 million total number of podcasts that have ever released one episode. But the crazy thing to me is that in that same period of time, I believe the total number of active shows that are actually releasing at least 30 days, the total number of those shows has only increased by 5 or 10%.
It's because only 1% of podcasts go over 10 episodes.
Right. It's a very, very small percentage. So to me, it's creating a gap in the market for more qualified, solid, good podcasts, because more and more people are realizing how beneficial it is to be a guest on shows. And like I said, that market's unlimited, right? There's 30 million, 40 million small business owners, not to mention authors,
speakers, coaches, entertainers, athletes.
Yep, they all want to be booked on podcasts,
Yeah.
and the total number of podcasts is not growing in terms of active. So it's kind of shrinking the market a little bit, but that's why we're going toward that. Hey, you want to be booked as a guest on shows? We believe that this is the best possible way to do it.
What I love is you shared how you learned being an interviewer.
Yes.
What about the guests? Not all guests are created equal.
No.
Not all guests are like yourself that carry the conversation. Right?
Not everybody's a Jeff Fenster. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, so
380 guests.
If you, how does Guestio help you to be a good guest? I mean, just because you got some money and you're paying and you're get me placed. I mean, that could be even difficult for you if the podcasters are saying, listen, Travis, no more.
Yeah,
right, because some favors aren't worth it. I mean, I get a
Yeah.
lot of offers, right? And I'm like, dude, some favors aren't worth it.
Yeah.
Right. No, it's a very good question. So we, for a while, we were actually kind of struggling with that, because we built this agency model that was we'll go out, white glove service, concierge done for you. We'll get you booked on top shows. And we're running into a little bit of that, where we would make a connection and the host would be like, okay, but it's so difficult to pull anything out of this guest. What can we do about this? But they're a solid guest. It's they built a massive company, or they have a lot of
Football
knowledge,
coaches, they're
information to share.
trained not to answer questions.
Right.
I had Anthony Lynn from the Chargers one time, and it was give him this open-ended question, and all his answers were yep.
Dude, there was this one guy who is a really well-known business author, and I had heard a couple stories about how difficult he is to interview, and I had him on my show. it's like pulling teeth to
Yeah.
try to get
And you're a
information out of this
professional
guy.
interviewer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So even there, like
Yeah,
it's
that
like,
was when I was like 400 episodes in,
Yeah.
and he was still just like, "Oh my gosh, that's crazy." So to answer your question, what we did recently is we pulled back on agency and concierge services because, frankly, I believe that like in the future, the future of this whole like guesting and connecting guests to shows and things is going to be more in the version of software because I just think it makes more sense. Like, so for instance, there's a lot of agencies out there that exist, and I had a graduate researcher do some research on this for me. They found all of the podcast guesting agencies that they could find, did all of their pricing, all of their placements, and did a calculation, figured out that on average they're charging anywhere from $500 to $700 per appearance that they get booked on somebody else's show. On average, obviously, some of them are going to be $200, some of them are going to be $1,000 or $1,500, but somewhere in there, $500 to $700. Where on Guestio, what we're doing is creating a marketplace where shows can come in and basically say like, hey, if you want to be a guest on my show, it's $100 for the spot. So I think it's better because, first of all, the show finally gets paid some money
Right.
because most independent
like the cameo
podcasters will never.
podcasting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
cool.
Yeah.
Most podcasters will never get paid a dime for
Right.
any of the work that they do on their show, and then they get met with this like disdain from agencies where the agency goes like, hey, we have a great guest for you, they're awesome for these reasons, and they
Yes.
pitch you the
Yeah.
guest, and I get 150 of these things a month probably at least, and most of them are terrible. And whenever I reply with like, sure, we charge X to come on the show, it's met with this like disdain to be like, well, we don't do that, blah blah blah. And it's like, well, what do you mean you don't do that? Like, your client's paying you,
yeah.
right? Like, you're getting paid to place that person on my show.
Right.
Why shouldn't I get like, because they conflate traditional media with podcasting is the problem. So they look at traditional media and they go like, well, that's payola. And it's like, well, this is not, I'm not a staff journalist at Forbes.
Right.
I don't get paid a salary to write articles and be a journalist.
God.
I'm an independent podcaster. Like, I make money based off of the things that I decide to make money on. So if you know, like, you're not pitching me just for the value you can bring to my audience.
Right.
Cut that horse shit like from the top. You're pitching me because you want to sell something to my audience, which, by the way, I don't care. Cool. If you're a good person, you have a strong product or service,
Value.
you should be selling your product or service
Right.
to audiences, and you should bring value to the table. But don't get mad because I've been taking the time, the energy, the money for 7
To build
years
the audience,
to build an
yeah.
audience of thousands of people that like listening to my show. So why are you going to be upset when I'm like, hey, I'm going to charge you? It's for the advertising space to come on my show. You know, so we think that putting the podcaster in charge of that and saying like, hey, charge whatever you want up to, we put limits on it and we make them verify stats so that's a good customer experience still. But I would rather see that money go to the podcaster than just the agencies because I think they deserve it, first of all. And also I think it's going to cut the cost of being booked on shows tremendously.
Yes.
Instead of paying
For sure.
$600 to go on a show that's worth $100, you pay $100 and it goes to the podcaster instead of the agency.
One of the things that I do, noting that most people, they'll pay me to consult at building a podcast, and I'll say the first thing I want you to do is capture 10 episodes so I can put you in the 1%.
Yep.
And two, it's enough episodes to get used to your own comfortability and confidence in doing a podcast.
Yep.
You're going to learn
Yep.
so much. And
We won't launch a show unless they have at least 10 episodes batched.
Yeah.
And
but
recorded already.
what I do differently is in understanding math, and I've always beat people by being consistent, is I've probably the most amount of shows. So I talked about having 9 interviews this morning. So people ask me, why do you go live every day? Well, I have 3 or 4 guests every single day, 7 days a week. Well, and I'm going to start using Guestio, by the way, because it fits perfectly into my business model.
Right.
Yeah.
So you want to go live with me now, because I get 2,500 requests of people that want to come on the playbook, which has 1,950 episodes of that. You can divide it by 7, it's still a lot.
Yep.
Anyways, but what's so interesting is I always say yes. But I'm trying to run the ESPN model where they have a car wash where you get to do a segment on here and they build you up to eventually maybe even being like a Mike Tannenbaum where you're the sports analyst. Well, he started by going through that car wash. So you can actually make money through Guestio using my model
Yeah.
where it's like, look, you want to go live with me? It's $100. Now, if you want to be on office hour, it's 500.
Yep.
And then if you want to be on the playbook itself,
Yep.
then maybe that's 5,000. If you want to be on the TV show on Apple for office hours or the playbook or whichever,
Yeah.
then that may be more.
Yep. And we have all those booking options.
But I'm also
there.
qualifying you.
Yeah,
Because
correct.
one of the things that I have an advantage of is I find diamonds in the rough. Because I'm saying yes to someone that nobody knows.
Yeah.
And they may be like Mike Moosberger is one of those guys, has this incredible story about his whole family dying. But nobody knows who Mike Moosberger is. He played a cup of coffee in the NFL is how I knew him.
Yeah.
And it's the second most downloaded podcast that I've ever done still today.
Wow.
With all of those, even though I've had Deepak and Cameron Diaz and all of these greats, because the story. But if I didn't open up the door to have a place to put someone that nobody knows,
Right.
you won't be doing that. So, I encourage everyone. This model is going to be amazing. I'm glad
Absolutely.
I'm a part of Guestio, and I'm not just promoting it because of that.
But I appreciate
am.
that, and
But
yeah.
it's really smart.
I think it's just better for the podcaster. I think it's better for the industry. And I think people will get over the whole payola thing because, like, it's podcasting and PR, they kind of get lumped together because they're similar activities, but they're
But
still
you're
wildly
protecting-
different industries.
Like, here's the thing. We deal with this all the time. I always say, because I have paid to play shit.
Yeah.
Right? I'm doing a VIP lunch here, and people are like, Dave, we're friends. Why do I have to pay? Because I'm curating the room.
Right.
Yeah.
Only people that get, and I do guarantee it, though. If someone's going to pay to be on one of my shows, if you're not satisfied, quantitative value, I'll give you your money back.
Yeah.
So don't tell me that it's about the money because you have no risk.
Right.
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 You
Exactly.
don't believe in yourself enough
Yeah.
to make the investment, even though it's guaranteed.
Well, and then I get these
Then
people.
I don't want you in my room. I don't want you on my show.
Yeah, I get other people that will. I'll tell them, the fee to come on the show, and then they'll just be like, "Well, what if we just did an affiliate deal and whatever
Right.
traffic, blah blah
Yeah,
blah."
right.
You can make
I'm
so much money,
I'm like,
Travis.
yeah, exactly. If you really have the numbers, then you should make more money doing this. And it's like, okay,
I say both.
Yeah, right, exactly. I'm fine with doing that, but you're still going to pay to come on the show because
Please.
it's the exposure to the audience and me saying that you are good at what you do, which
Yeah,
you have to
my
also
time.
prove to me first before I let you on. You can't just
Right.
pay me, but also like it's my time, it's all these other things, and it's to protect myself in case you suck.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
what if you suck as a guest and you don't convert any audience members? That's not on me. That's on you.
Right.
So don't put that on me, first of all. Second of all, if I'm going to use that logic, there's literally unlimited number of people that would come on my show for free
Right.
and do an affiliate deal. It would be like, there would be 300, there'd be double or triple the number of people that are already trying to come on. I only got like 4 interview spots a week. So, I mean, a month. So like 150 requests, 200 requests. It's like, it's impossible to fit all those in. And like, you're just going to be like, oh yeah, just take an affiliate commission.
You
And
just
that should be enough.
take the show by themselves.
Yeah.
And you just run it.
There you go.
I
Let's see how it
reverse-
goes.
Go, Travis. You just do it. You're gonna run it.
Shawn, I actually reversed my whole with Warren Moon, and I had a sports marketing company, global sports marketing company. And the way I started was reversing that. And so I went to naming right deals, $20 million for the Jets and the Giant Stadium. And I said, hey, if I bring you the title to Giant Stadium, can I get 10% of what I bring to you? And it was the exact opposite. They're like, yeah, fuck, why won't we do that, Dave?
Right.
And so then I did it, and then they hired me because I did it, and I was able to tell people when we were building our company, well, who are your clients? Well, I got the Giants, the Jets, and I had like 10 really big deals where they were all pay per performance.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Now people were paying me to consult and perform because I performed.
Yeah.
And so, we get caught up into this variety of, what it actually means. And creating a marketplace as democratization of all business occurs, not just with blockchain, but with apps themselves. There's a democratization of, hey, look, we're going to pay quantitative value for value.
Yeah.
And we don't need to pay middlemen.
Yep.
Correct. Yeah. That's the goal.
Fantastic model. I hope that people will get on to Guestio on both sides.
Yeah, both sides. We got both sides
And,
available.
check that out. What most importantly, I hope people understand is you got to start.
Yes.
Because you-
Yeah. Get 10 in the can.
Just do it.
Get your podcast going. I mean, and I think the story is really great. Even if you're trying to appear on a lot of podcasts, having your own podcast will help you to appear on more podcasts and vice versa.
It absolutely does. It actually makes a big difference. If you have your own show, it makes it easier to land bookings in other shows. Plus, you can do more collaborative efforts and interview swaps and stuff like that. And then there was one thing too I wanted to touch on because I didn't.
Oh, wait,
fully
where's your
answer
Everbowl going to be?
South Summerlin.
South
so,
Summerlin, good location.
215 and
Nice and hot,
Flamingo.
a nice cool
Yeah.
bowl of acai with peanut butter
It'll
and
be
honey.
great.
Yes, I'm
making me
feeling
hungry
it.
right
He's
now.
trying to make a point.
Yeah. So
I'm
what I was
doing a
gonna
commercial
say,
for you. I don't own an Everbowl. I'm just on the board of advisors. You idiots own the stores. I'm trying to drive traffic, so
Yeah, I appreciate
sorry.
that.
I'm using this as a commercial.
to your point about the training guests as well. So we are moving away from concierge, getting back more into software for that reason. But the second thing that I did not mention is that we also built like a media training program to help people who have never done this before,
that's great.
maybe aren't confident, or just need some help doing it. So it's
Yeah.
like a 6-week media training course on like how to get prepared, what equipment that you need, what lighting, just kind of the basics, and then also how to communicate confidently, how to tell stories, how to zero in on like client testimonials, be interesting in the conversation, have strong calls to action without it feeling like a call to action. So we teach all that in the training, and then we have an actual mock interview at the very end of it where we put you in touch with a professional podcaster who does a completely like fake but real interview. They just don't release it on their show unless they want to. They're more than welcome to at the end. But a full mock interview, that podcaster gives you feedback on like how you can do better as a podcast guest and what podcast hosts are looking for in a guest. And then after that, we actually go get you booked on 5 shows in the marketplace.
Wow,
So it's
there
like
you
a
go.
fully done for you.
You should create a podcast called The Mock Interview.
Yeah.
And then use all of your mock interviews as a podcast,
There you
and then
go.
it creates
Just
even
release
more
all of
value.
them. Yeah,
You're doing
true.
it anyway.
That's true.
How can people learn more about Guestio and get in contact with you?
Yeah. So right now it's just guestio.com. We're building out an entire website for that, what I just mentioned, the media training plus Guestio Pro subscription and all that kind of stuff. So that should be done like mid-October. So if you're watching this after that, then just go to my Instagram bio and you should probably find the link in my bio. So at Travis Chappell on Instagram.
At Travis Chappell, make sure you look him up. Tremendous guest. I hope that you learned a ton. I hope that you're inspired, and I hope that you, most importantly, take action and that you continue to tune in every single week right here on the podcast. We'll be back again next week. We're going to have to roll up our sleeves and see what we can do to top this guest. It's going to be a hard one to do, but we'll give it our best effort. See you then.